funny story. So I start off, and my first job was in Citibank, Bombay, in what used to be called global finance, which is the corporate banking side of the bank. On my second day at work, they made me sort of get my signature authorized to be an authorized signatory. I had to register my signature with all of the requisite authorities. And day 3, I'm signing a check for, I nearly fell off my chair, 500 crores. I had never seen zeros. I had never seen so many zeros on a check before.
Welcome. We are here for another session of My First Job, the podcast, where each week we speak to people who go through their own individual career journeys. They have their successes and their moments of reflection. None of it, I think, is a setback. Today, we have Divya Sampath. She's sponsor and partner of AWE Funds. Divya has had a long and successful career in IT. At times, you have to be lucky. You're born at a time when the world is changing and the world itself is transitioning to a completely new paradigm, as they say. This is one place where that word actually fits. Divya's been in IT when search engines were still known by names such as InfoSeek and Lycos and Alta Vista. Social media didn't exist. To come through a stage from there to where she is today is definitely going to be an interesting journey to hear about. Let's welcome Divya to the show.
Hi, Venu. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I appreciate the kind words.
Great to have you on the show. One of the things that you said is that you divide your time equally between venture capital and social causes, which is a great balance because I think work-life balance, while people look for, you seem to have found that golden mark between handing out funds to people and ensuring that there's a certain set of people who are uplifted as well. So what's it like?
That's a very interesting way to put it, Venu. First of all, I think I learned from way back in my career. I've been fortunate throughout my career to have great mentors and role models to look up to. And one of the things I learned from watching them is that when it comes to work-life balance, of course, it's important. One should never overwork and burn oneself out and all of that. But it's far more important to find purpose in what you're doing. That is the source of enduring happiness and joy, finding balance, as it were. That's really the secret. So whether it's working as a venture capitalist or supporting the various causes that are dear to my heart, as you said, the key to finding true balance is to always try to stay connected to your personal purpose, your personal values. The old-fashioned virtues of working hard and trying to do good work, right? That does give a lot of satisfaction. At the end of the day, most of us spend, 8 to 16 hours, hopefully not 16 hours, but 8 to 16 hours at work during a day. So it's very tied up in our personal identities, our self-esteem, the way we perceive ourselves. So the way we show up for work, what value we find in the work that we do is very critical, I think, to maintain some sort of mental balance or happiness. Finding that elusive work-life balance, as the saying goes.
I'm sure we'll get into the venture capital part a little later.
People often say, and I think it said on the LinkedIn post about this podcast, that I've had a zigzag career. I also had a zigzag education. So one way of looking at it is that I was open to all kinds of different experiences, which is a very positive spin to put on it. The other way to look at it is that, like most people in their late teens, you're not quite sure what you want to do with life. One may have multiple talents or multiple interests, as the saying goes. My official college graduation, I did a BCom. But at the same time, being surrounded by friends and family who were all extremely type A personalities and very achievement oriented, it wasn't sufficient to just go to college and get a degree. I, at the same time, pursued what used to be in those days called a GNIT program, which was a graduate diploma program in programming. As well as I pursued the equivalent of a BA in French at the Alliance Française. Because I was genuinely at one point in time toying with, should I become, should I take up arts or should I become some sort of a diplomat and use my linguistic abilities? But my true love was I was always very attracted to technology. So that has continued to be a constant thread through my career. So having started that way, my first job actually pre-MBA, I worked for a year with A. Ferguson, which is at the time hadn't been taken over by a larger consulting firm. It is known as a consulting and an audit firm. And I worked with the consulting side as a programmer analyst to digitize their management library. So that was a very interesting experience. I was surrounded by management consultants from the top deep business schools, as you can imagine. So that had something of an influence in terms of what to do next. So that was how I ended up. It certainly had a significant influence on why I wrote the MBA entrances and how I ended up doing business. And post my business degree, the start of my zigzag career was again, I had a dual major because as one did in those days in finance and marketing. And I picked finance and went into banking for about a year. Early, I figured out that while I loved the people I worked with them, certainly I joined Citibank, which is as good an employer as you could get in those days. And we had a phenomenal management associate training program. Funny story. So I start off, and my first job was in Citibank Bombay in what used to be called global finance, which is the corporate banking side of the bank. On my second day at work, they made me sort of get my signature authorized to be an authorized signatory. I had to register my signature with all of the requisite authorities. And day 3, I'm signing a check for, I nearly fell off my chair, 500 crores. I had
What does that feel like?
zeros. I had never seen so many zeros on a check before. And
Okay, how come? What is the context there? Yeah.
So again, I was managing cash management. So corporate cash management means that fundamentally you move large sums of money around. And this is very much in the mid 1990s, Indian banking was also not as automated as it is today, right? So money didn't move instantly. There was no NEFT, no RTGS, etc. If you had to move money from, let's say, from Kolkata or Jamshedpur to Pune, which is what the Tata Group used to do, they would have to work with their bankers to work with a correspondent banking network. So you would transfer money to, let's say, your correspondent bank's account in Jamshedpur, and those folks would then transfer the money to their branch in Pune, which would arrive 4 days later. And then that branch would, through the local clearing system, transfer the money to Telco's account with Citibank. So there was a cash management system. So Citibank had leveraged this opportunity because money did move very slowly. Either that or you had to move money through much slower methods. It would take 2 weeks for the money to get transferred. So Citibank had created this cash management offering, leveraging the weaknesses in the banking system to say, we'll move your money. Otherwise, it'll take you 2 weeks. With us, it'll take 4 days by leveraging this network of correspondent banks. And they were making money off the float because while the money is moving through the system, you're sitting on 2 days of float. So that money is basically free money that you can then put into the money market and so on and so forth. You to boost up your statutory liquidity ratio, your SLR, and so on and so forth. So I'm getting too deep into that, but this is the context. It's
very clearly what you found out is early on you said a check for 500 crores, and that kind of set the stage. After that,
what brought me very quickly down to earth was actually seeing the credit in my own bank account, which is barely touching 5 figures. So on the one hand, my salary was like had barely crossed 5 figures, and on the other hand, at work, it was very schizophrenic in a way. But beyond, you very quickly stop thinking of it when it has so many zeros and you're talking about such vast sums of money. The thing that inures you is you stop thinking of it as real money, which is dangerous. Because it is real money.
It is dangerous, yes. So how would you ensure that all of this was, when it's a huge responsibility. So 1 zero from 500 crores will depreciate the value by, straight away. So how do you ensure that all of this checks and balance?
Yeah, very true. And fortunately, Citibank was not stupid enough to trust a fresh MBA graduate with the sole responsibility of managing all this. They had a very competent staff of 5 people whom I was managing. And those are, frankly, the people who did all the hard work. They were the ones who actually prepared the checks, did the transaction entries. All I had to do was sit there and approve things on 3 different computer systems because that's how things were, and sign a few checks. I had to sign about between 20 to 60 checks in a day because some things actually physically had to be signed and go through a physical clearing system. Everything else used to be approved on various systems and flow through. Staff members had been there for 7 years, and all one did was, supervise them, quote unquote.
Yeah, but it's amazing how there were so many, like you said, there were so many gaps in the banking system that were actually models of making money at that point in time. It may have been a small window, but like you said, Are you finding those kind of things still happening, that no matter how much technology catches up, you still have gaps?
That's a really good point, Venu. And actually, we are making a fundamentally very good point. I would actually say that there's a reason, and cash management operations this way was a product offering that pretty much was invented in India and then was transferred to other sort of South Asian and a few other developing economies because, of course, the developed world didn't need it. There wasn't money moved much faster there. They had other automatic systems of moving money. Citibank saw this opportunity and frankly was quick to exploit it and make money out of this in India. There's a reason also that so many Indian talents went on to bleed Citibank, and there have been multiple CEOs, COOs, and leaders of Citibank of Indian origin, starting with Victor Menezes back in the 1990s. And I think he passed out of IIT Bombay sometime in the late 1960s. So we've been exporting talent since way back when, right? But that sort of management talent and that entrepreneurial spirit of seeing a gap in the market, seeing an opportunity that nobody else is seeing, an inefficiency, and saying, I can develop a product or a service that can solve this problem for customers, and they'll be willing to pay me for it. That actually is at the nucleus of most of the really successful startups that I look at investing in as a venture capitalist, right? On the other hand, I'd say it's also a common thing that you see in the social sector world. There is a service need or a gap that needs to be addressed. And someone stands up and says, why can't I be the one to fix this problem? Or at least let me take a stab at fixing this problem. And there's value being delivered. Someone is going to benefit from it. That common principle of, finding that exploitable market opportunity, limited though it might be in terms of time. Now it doesn't exist, obviously, because, you have instantaneous electronic transfers. But for a long time it did. For about a period of close to a decade, Citibank was making money off this and other people followed. They also made money off this because of the weakness of the banking system. And genuinely, if you're a Tisco, you're a Telco, you're a Hindustan Lever, you have payrolls that run into crores, you have, payments that run into crores. A single day's saving in terms of moving money from one destination to another is worth a lot of money to you, right? That was an interesting opportunity then. And there continue to be other opportunities like that today. But that is a common thread. Maybe the technology has changed, but their ability to spot those gaps has not.
This is amazing. So when you were doing so well in finance and in a bank, what brought about the transition to Sifi, right? Or was there an intermediate?
I was brand manager in between. And I had an adventurous 2 years as a brand manager after Citi. So as I said, that zigzag career, then the next zag, if you will, after the Citi zig was I kind of quickly figured out that I didn't want to be a banker. Mainly because I looked around me and said, in 20 years, do I want to be doing any of these people's jobs? And the answer was no. So I was at least fortunate to have figured that out quickly enough that after a year, I quit Citibank and joined Sterling Holidays as a brand manager because my other specialization was marketing. And I had friends who went into brand management, and here was this opportunity because Sterling Holidays had pioneered the concept of timeshares in India at the time. And they had hired a rock star team of sales and marketing folks from the who's who, from Procter & Gamble, Hindustan Lever, Asian Paints, all of the best known marketing brand companies of the day had hired talent. So it was a very, very sought after place to be working as a young marketing professional. So I ended up joining as a brand manager. And again, I was very fortunate to have fantastic bosses, mentors, great learning experiences, and enjoyed it. One thing that I found
conceptually, that was completely new, right? Because the whole concept of time sharing. Now, of course, you have an Airbnb and so many others who have leveraged that and taken it to a different level. But at that point, to even say fractional owning of holiday, was something that really had to be drilled into people. They really didn't think about it as an option.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were sort of creating the market because this was kind of well known in Europe and the US, right? They had these Club Med kind of timeshare facilities that had been around for since the 1970s, really. But in India, this concept of, I'm going to pay a fixed fee and this entitles me to a 2-week or 3-week vacation every year in a network of holiday properties rather than sort of owning a property outright was a very, very new concept. Sterling Holidays actually had to educate people and create the market. So it was very, very interesting work. It was very, very interesting being a brand manager trying to communicate these ideas. We started off with, this classic holiday summer vacation locations. Then, of course, you obviously realize that, those great hill stations are pretty much occupied for maximum 5 months in a year, even if you include the off-season periods. The property is free for the other 7 months, right? Sterling Holidays very smartly launched what they call the heritage list of properties, which were all linked to pilgrimage sites, or some of the more traditional. So they started kind of creating destination themed holidays, which might be, so for example, one of the very first heritage properties was in Parni in Tamil Nadu. But they tried very hard to actually get something in Tirumala, which of course was not allowed. So they ended up doing, I think they dropped the Tirupati idea after a while, but they were genuinely trying very hard to see.
Do you remember any particular campaign or interaction with customers which kind of stands out for that time?
I'll tell you one that kind of stands out. So we were trying to launch a new sort of golfing holiday package series, and we had tied up at the time with Greg Norman, the famous golfer of those days, to do signature golf courses. The first signature golf course was launched in Delhi, and that went fine. But then we needed to find other sort of golfing properties at reasonable prices that we could then turn into resorts and launch. Coorg was one of the destinations that, the Sterling Holidays team ended up choosing. So they found the job of, they put me in charge of actually developing the campaign, the brochures, the leaflets out. I hadn't been to the property at the stage, and the resort hadn't come up. So essentially, it was selling the destination, as one does. So I went to, I got the creatives to write beautiful copy about, Coorg, and I had to correct the copy because there was some nonsense about the sound of cheetahs in the early morning light. And I had to point out to the copywriter that cheetahs had gone extinct in India a couple of 100 years ago. I mean, it's a poetic license aside. You can't sort of just make up African.
You can't play with the facts to that extent, yeah.
So there we are. We come out and, we do the launch ad. We got the leaflets and the brochures, and they're sort of ready to be launched to the sales team. And the marketing manager says, okay, when did you, the head of sales and marketing, he says, okay, have you been to the site, and have you actually, there might be some additional things that you want to highlight? And I'm like, no, I haven't been to the site. He says, what are you talking about? How can you market a site you've never been to? Which was a good point. So the corporate communications head of Sterling Holidays and I, a lady called Meera, a great friend of mine, we unfortunately drifted out of touch, but we went on a trip to Coorg. And then when we land up at resort site, we discover that we've been talking about all of these rolling hills and stuff like that. We are actually, the resort site is in Virajpet, which, if you're familiar with Coorg, is kind of, not really much.
Not really on a...
And it's barely, you could barely call it hilly terrain. So, and which was also understandable because remember, this was supposed to be a golf resort. So with golf resorts, you don't necessarily want sloping hills.
You can't have so many ups and downs.
The copy that had been written and approved was all about rolling hills and misty mornings. And the misty mornings did exist, of course. But it was a good thing we went and came back, and sheepishly, kind of before we did the next lot of printed collaterals, we kind of redid a few things and included a few actual photographs that we had gone and taken at the site. Not a single building had come up at this point, but we did get some actual views of the Virajpet property included in the brochure.
Okay. That's another break of a different sort. So how did Sifi happen?
So I found myself at Sterling Holidays gravitating towards all of the projects that included some sort of computerization or digitalization, right? And I would always put my hand up and volunteer to do that. And I was the, first person to say, okay, we need to create a website. So they put me in charge of creating the website and, getting the agent, briefing the agency and getting a website put up and all of that. So my boss, when he was doing my annual appraisal, and again, was fortunate to have two really great bosses. I moved from one to the other, a gentleman called Ravi Warrior and then to a gentleman called V.N. Bhattacharya, who was one extremely accomplished, very smart, fantastic mentor, fantastic boss. And I remember after doing my annual appraisal in April of 98, he gave me a good review and he gave me some feedback. He said, look, and we started talking as one does, good bosses talk to you about your future and development and what do you want to do next. And as I was talking, he said, everything that I hear that you're really passionate about is really in the tech field, not so much in the marketing field. So my advice to you was, think about what you want to be doing 5 years from now. Picture what is exciting you and is going to keep you happy. And then, figure out what you want to do next, because that's how you're going to find real satisfaction in a job well done. Because you're a good brand manager, you're competent. No doubt you can continue to succeed in this path. But the thing that really makes you light up is something other than pure marketing. So that was good advice. And I started casually looking around for, at what was happening. Quite a few of my friends had actually at this point, this was, 1998. tech was booming. That whole Y2K thing that you mentioned was just sort of coming up. So lots of people were joining the likes of Infosys and TCS and Wipro, and starting to make careers in the software development world. They were starting to go overseas. My batchmates, my friends, some of my juniors were starting to go overseas and do interesting things. The thing that I was hooked onto was something that was barely sort of known in India at that point in time, which was the internet. Right. I looked around and there were really less than a handful. You couldn't even count on the fingers of one hand the number of companies that were doing internet work in India in 1998. And one of them, the better known one, was Rediff, which was Bombay based and was a website. Right. And the less well-known one was this Chennai-based upstart company called Satyam Infoway, which was a subsidiary spun out of Satyam Computer Services. And they were talking about being India's first private ISP at a point when India's ISP policy had not been rolled out. So this was an internet company that was not licensed to sell internet. But I was enthusiastic about the idea. And I was very sure that, and of course, the signs were there. The BSNL, MTNL were the only ones who were giving you that fantastic blazing speed. I was so excited when I upgraded my home internet from 28.8 kbps to 56.6 kbps.
And I remember selling Dishnet DSL. We did a campaign for them where 256 kbps broadband was sold at 30,000 rupees a month. So, so obviously there were people who knew how quickly it's going to change, or at least they took the plunge into it early on.
That's very true. And remember that at this point, the ISP policy hadn't been released. So Dishnet wasn't selling internet at the time that I'm talking about, right? Nobody was, because they weren't allowed to. Only 3 companies in India could, which was BSNL, and MTNL. These were the only 3 companies that could actually sell internet to anyone, corporate or not. They were, of course, we were allowed to sell private network services, which is what Sifi was doing at the time. They were also doing system integration work, and particularly around some areas which are, nobody talks about, EDI, etc., etc. But there were services B2B, no B2C, no. So I walked into their offices with my resume in hand and said, "This is my resume. Please consider hiring me." I think they were a little surprised, but the head of HR listened to me for half an hour. She asked some questions. I was very, very enthusiastic. She left me sitting in the room opposite the reception. I remember this, in the ground floor. And after some time, this gentleman walked in and he sat down and we had a really great conversation. I had a lot of ideas to share. We spoke for, I think, close to an hour. And he finally asked me, he says, "Okay, this is all very interesting and clearly you're enthusiastic and knowledgeable about the internet. What kind of job would you like to do here?" And I knew that, there was no sort of B2C internet just yet. So I said, "Would you hire me for corporate sales?" He said, "I thought you don't have any sales experience." I said, "That's right, but I learn on the job." For whatever reason, I think he said, "Yes, okay, fine. Come on board. You can start at corporate sales." We had a grand total in Chennai of 3 corporate sales people, one of whom was my boss. What I did not know, which stood me in good stead later on, I found this out much later, was that the person I had been speaking to, of course, as I was walking out, I realized that was the CEO of the company, R. Ramraj. And what I did not know at the time was Mr. R. Ramraj was a close friend of Mr. V.N. Bhattacharya, because they had gone to IMCAL, let's say. So there was a conversation that happened behind the scenes about, he says, "There's this girl who works for you, V.N. and she's applied here." And fortunately, of course, it was V.N. who had given me this advice about, following your passion and all of that. So I was completely open about applying to other jobs. So it's not like I was doing secretly. So V.N. was also kind enough, obviously, to give me a positive.
So what was it like selling the corporate internet at that point in time?
Yeah, would the internet solution on the corporate internet. It was more vision than anything else, because you had to sell the probability and the potential of change, because nobody had actually seen what the internet could do for businesses in India yet. So you had to really sell vision through a combination of, I think, sheer sort of power and luck and whatnot. Within 1 month of joining Sifi, I had landed the largest internet commerce deal in Sifi's history up to that point. So we were all small enough to fit into one sort of small basement in the Velachery Road office in Sifi. We all crammed in there. There was a cake cutting ceremony and, all of that happened. So I was very lucky to have that early success. Buoyancy generated by that early success with that and a couple of other deals. About a month after closing that deal, it was a very interesting one, because I sold it and then I very confidently. So I sold this to ColorPlus, which at that time was not yet owned by a larger multinational. It was an independent Chennai-based company.
So what is ColorPlus's reason? What did they see
He said, we're going to create an online website where you will end up doing most of your sales. We will build you an Amazon.com in India, but for clothes, is what we told them. So that's the vision he sold them. And so the CEO said, look, I'm happy to try this out because I can see that overseas. And, the CEO was very forward looking. He said, look, I can see that LL Bean is doing this in the US and I can see that the Gap is doing this. So I'd like to try it out in India. And at this point, nobody else was actually selling clothes online. And ColorPlus was kind of a niche brand, right? Upmarket, but niche brand. Wasn't exactly all of it. But he said, look, the thing is we'll do this, but early August, but we on the condition that you can get the site up and running by Deepavali, which is October. So I looked at my technical architect who was in the meeting with me. He was like, don't say that. And I said, sir, I think we can do that for you. And this dude was like, what did you just say to the man? I said, no, don't worry about it. We'll go. So I went back and I actually talked to the technical team and said, no, look, we'll have to do it in a slightly different way. And luckily we were using the Sterling Commerce platform. And the product manager was very happy that it was going to be a Sterling Commerce sale. We said, look, we'll bend over backwards, but we'll make it happen. Everyone finally signed off on it. So it isn't that I ended up sort of committing something that we didn't deliver. Team had to really pull very long nights and make it happen, but we did make it happen. It was successfully launched on Deepavali Day in 1998. So we did meet that commitment. But the thing that happened for me after that was, and I had a couple of other sales successes, but that one boosted my confidence to the point when I had another long list of ideas. And of course, I marched into Ramraj at the time didn't have a cabin to himself. Everybody, he had a walled off cubicle. So Ramraj and the three other sort of department business unit heads sort of had walled off cubicles next to him, which were kind of half glass and half sort of partition. And the rest of it was just open office, right? So I marched into his cubicle one day and sat down and said, Chief, we used to call him Chief, I have these ideas to share with you. And he very patiently listened to all of the ideas. He went through the list. Actually, he was very, very incisive thinker, right? I still use lessons that I learned from him. He said, okay, this idea is rubbish. It won't work for this reason. This idea has merit, but you need to work on it, etc., etc. At the end of the conversation, he said, these are all good ideas. And I think at least 3 of them are worth implementing. So why don't you come on board my team directly and work on executing these things? My initial reaction was horror, absolute horror. My job is not to go and execute all these ideas. My job is only to give ideas.
That's such a wonderful lesson, Divya, because a lot of people think that giving out the idea and their job is done. Whereas
I was happy to learn that lesson early.
Yeah.
So look, if you're going to have the courage and the conviction to think that this idea is going to change things for the company and we should do it, then you should, put your time and money where your mouth is and come and actually work on it. So
give me one of those things that you, at that point, you came up with, which today in retrospect looks almost obvious, but at the time was not.
Yeah. So I was, as I said, a tech enthusiast. So I said that we should actually start an e-learning division, which took a couple of years. But I said, and my whole model was, the company that's doing great online tech training and programming, etc., is a company called ZDNet. At that time, ZDNet was the US-based thing, which was actually offering a lot of content. And I said, we should make an Indian ZDNet. And lo and behold, actually, I was given the opportunity to go and sign. We ended up in 2000, early 2000. I ended up going along with a senior colleague and signing an agreement with ZDNet to bring that kind of services to Sifi in India. Literally a few days after I joined Ramraj's team officially as as member of his team heading strategic initiatives, quote unquote, Ramraj had a town hall meeting, which we used to do every month. And he said, so you've heard that Infosys is planning to list on NASDAQ, right? And we said, yeah. We were all excited because an Indian company going and listing on US stock exchange. He said, this time next year, Sifi will be listed on NASDAQ. We were all, what? He said, I've heard a pin drop. There was absolute dead silence in the town hall with about 70 people. And but we were, when we recovered, I think there was a mix of shock, elation, disbelief,
everything. Yeah.
But the end of that story is that almost a year after that, October 19th, 1999, he told us this in November 1998. October 19th, 1999, we were listed on NASDAQ, first internet company to list on NASDAQ. So I was very fortunate to be a part of that journey, to be a junior cog in that machine, but a team which took us to NASDAQ, launched and pioneered a whole lot of things. In fact, a lot of people don't realize, but Sifi and a few other players played a huge part in influencing the privatization of the internet in India. The privatization of the internet in India, the ISP policy was announced in September 1998. Sifi launched its consumer internet services on the back of that. Internet in India started its journey there. Sifi did a lot of interesting things because most people didn't have computers. They didn't have internet-capable mobile phones back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So Sifi pioneered cyber cafes, a chain of cyber cafes called, across the country, so people could come and use shared computing infrastructure to access the internet. So it was a groundbreaking company, path-breaking company in so many ways. I learned a lot. And again, we had a murderer's row of the top talent from everywhere, from every top company, whether it was tech talent or marketing talent or sales talent or operational talent or financial talent. We just had top talent. So everywhere I looked, there were people that I could learn from, people who mentored me, people who were doing amazing things, and you got to be working alongside them and just watching and learning from them and, being part of that journey. And that was how I got started on the internet. The rocket took off. We listed on NASDAQ. We did the India World acquisition, went back to NASDAQ. So in February 2000 to go and finance the India World deal because we didn't have enough money in the bank to do that deal. At the time, it was, $100 million. It was 500 crores at that time, US dollar exchange rate being what it was then. It was the largest cash and stock merger and acquisition that had been done in India up to that point. So, in the US, AOL had just taken over Time Warner. Really, the rocket ship. People believed that the bubble was at its peak. Let's put it that way, right? The internet.
Yeah. But I'm also saying, Divya, that your learning should have been not just hockey stick. Is there another way of putting it? Because you're literally doing new things. In retrospect, it looked like committing to deliver a website in 2 months was almost like, yeah, so what? But then to say, I'll go and list on NASDAQ, figuring out everything that needed to be done, ensuring that it was all in place. And how did you go about figuring out? Or you said you had the talent in-house, or it was a combination of several things that worked in your favor?
So definitely both, right? Because the one thing that I learned was Ramraj didn't say that lightly, right? This had been part of his vision from the day that he agreed to come on board as a professional CEO of Sifi. He did several things. He struck a deal with the Ramaling Raju and the Satyam family to say, I'm going to run Sifi as a completely independent company. It will have a completely independent board. We may be initially completely owned by Satyam Computer Services, but I will hire a separate team. We will not go to market with any of the other Satyam divisions. We will chart our own destiny because we're an internet company. We are not software services company. So we don't run businesses. The rest of your business looks different from ours. So we will run this differently. And we are going to become independently listed on the stock exchanges. And I think very quickly after that, he told me later that he had decided that it would be quicker to list overseas than it would be to list in India, which is why
That he was right. Yeah, absolutely.
And there was a lot of capital being made available to internet companies at the time. So Sifi would have been foolish to miss that opportunity, right? So we didn't miss that opportunity. And a lot of groundwork and thinking had gone into that point. And it was that vision which inspired all of us. So I think great leadership is both inspiration and preparation. And Ramraj really taught me a lot because he embodied that in so many ways, right? You and I, Venu, in a private chat earlier, were talking about how one of the key skills one needs to learn is how to read a room and, how to talk to people. And that was something that I learned from watching Ramraj and learning from Ramraj because it was something that I was not inherently good at. So I had other mentors too, but of course he stands out and he still continues to be a mentor whose advice I rely on today. So
yeah, because
like you were saying, I would say that we soared up, but we also came crashing down to earth a few months later with the .com bust, right? So very quickly, the stock options, which we were all very excited about in terms of as we were watching the notional value climb, had within a matter of months, weeks if not months, become a penny stock. So when the fall came, it was a very sharp fall, and we were among the smaller fish in that large pond, right? Everybody from the Amazons of the world, the eBays of the world, 9 out of 10 startups that had listed on NASDAQ as internet companies actually failed and shut down. Even some of the giants like AOL today kind of, AOL kind of exists as sort of a very tiny company somewhere. It still exists a corporate entity, but that AOL Time Warner merger obviously split up, and Warner Brothers went its own way, and Time Magazine shut down, and all of that happened, right? So the world changed a lot after that .com bust. I know a lot of people were very, very depressed, but fortunately for Sifi, most of the revenue was still coming from the B2B business and was on a much more stable footing. So while our stock value had perhaps crashed, our business was robust and was continuing to grow at a steady pace. So Sifi was not, uh, you know, of course, everyone was badly impacted. I wouldn't say not, but our business was not impacted. What went away was all of these things of, people coming to us and say, Sifi should acquire us. I won't name names, but there were several sort of large businesses which approached Sifi and said, you should buy us out, like AOL bought over and took over Time Warner. And, that sort of sucked, right? But
No, it was like you said, it was one of those times which today, in retrospect, 2 decades ago, people don't remember. They remember the crash of 2008 because it's more current. But what happened is that it literally wiped out a whole lot of companies in India, and people began. I remember articles saying that the internet is just another fad. Nothing is really going to happen. This is not going to, take off, or it's going to be one of those things that happen. And it was literally, step by step, which is why I'm saying the people who stuck around, which you did, you figured out, you believed in it deeply enough to say that, that this is where I think the future, and that is hardest to do when things are down. It's very easy to do when, markets are growing at X multiples every year. But it's very different when you have to try and figure out, okay, where do I stand? And then trying to figure out where do you go? So how did you make that decision on the next thing? Because you took over, you grew businesses of Cognizant in North America and Europe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm saying we've just touched upon the early part of your career and we're already 45 minutes into this.
Yeah, maybe I should shorthand things a little bit more. But I want to address two things which you said, which I think are relevant lessons which I learned. Which is, again, I said, as I was fortunate to have smart people around me who advised me and guided me, and I was able to learn from them. One of the things that I had formed a deep conviction about was that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. About the internet and the potential of the internet. We did believe that there were some other factors which needed to fall in place for the internet to truly become transformational in India. And that was an early trend that we had a lot of conviction about, which is when mobile internet really proliferates. That's when it's going to be transformational for the vast majority of India, because most people will never access the internet through computers. It will end up being, though, even we didn't at that time anticipate just how large it would be and how transformational it would be. I remember helping Ramraj write speeches about how, feature phone, Kerala fishermen with feature phone access were able to SMS and find out which port was getting the better prices for fish that day. And therefore, how mobile technology combined with internet technology was going to completely transform the lives of every person in India over the next 2 decades. And I was helping him write those pieces, and we had that deep conviction, which never changed. So that kind of helped me to keep up with it. I mean, obviously, it was the first major sort of economic crisis I had seen in my career, but certainly not the first seen by my parents or, my seniors at my employers. So people, talked about what they had gone through and the kind of turbulent times that they had confronted, and to just try and find a firm place to sit and to keep your feet on the ground and continue to work hard and, find opportunities in the day-to-day as well. So I ended up moving to Cognizant at a time when Cognizant was a relatively young company. And again, it had not hit $1 billion in revenue when I joined, which was 2005 May. But the other thing that I did join was also a practice which in an area where Cognizant was less well known for, which was infrastructure services, because that was my background. I'd come from Sifi, where I'd helped to set up a remote infrastructure management business, and I understood the networking space quite well. So I joined that practice in Bangalore and I initially helped to set up the consulting capability, the business development capability with a group of, I was relatively still quite, barely 10 years out of business school, and even younger group of smart MBAs and engineers from top schools. That's the team that we set up. And again, we had a lot of passion and conviction, and ended up winning some lighthouse deals, stealing the business from the more established competition like TCS and Wipro and HCL and even IBM and Accenture in a couple of cases, and that gave us a lot of confidence and momentum. And I ended up moving to London to help set up the infrastructure services business in Europe for Cognizant at the time. And I lived in London for 5 years doing this. When I went, I was the first person on the ground. We had no customers in the UK or Europe. So, but we ended up doing a couple of deals, and we ended up at close to $1 million in my first year of operation. The second year of operation.
So how did you land your first deal? How did you go about meeting customers? What was it that you
Well,
did?
you leverage your friends and colleagues, right? I went around and made friends with every client partner in the London office who was selling app services, and I said, "Can I come and sit with you in a customer meeting? I won't sell anything. I'm just there to listen. So please take me with you." And I did that for a month, and out of that came some of our early sort of customer opportunities, including at customers like Lloyd's, TSB Bank, and AstraZeneca. Like I said, that when you listen to what customers need and you find an opportunity, the problem that nobody else is solving, none of the other vendors is even looking at, and you say, "Look, I'll solve this problem for you. I'll save this money for you. I'll remove this sort of quality issue for you." People are willing to try you out, and that's what we did. We kind of sneaked in almost, and then after that, once we established enough of footing, we also won RFPs in competitive situations against the competition. So as I said, again, the team grew very rapidly. We did $7.5 million in the second year of operations, $25 million in third year of operations. By the time I moved back to India, to a different division of Cognizant, and this was at the beginning of 2013, we were doing $110 million a year. So $0 to $110 million a year in 5 years.
Yeah. So it looks like the check you signed for 500 crores early on was just a portent of things.
My money, by the way, but yeah. That continued to be a trend. Though I will say all of my employers have treated me very fairly and compensated me and all of that, so no complaints. But certainly the disparity that continues is the size of the money, that other people's money that you manage and deploy, and your own money that you manage and deploy. The difference, of course, remains quite considerable.
That will always be a kind of the thing. So I'm saying now, I wish we had more time to spend on this, but your venture capital, how did you decide that you then wanted to get into, was it one thing that you felt that I have done enough, but I think if I get, what were your motivations?
Yeah. So I'd been, after Cognizant, I was with Microsoft for 5 years, during which I moved to Singapore, and I moved to another very fine company called ServiceNow. All of these are great IT companies. But at this point, I started wondering, I was questioning myself. I was looking at other people. Some of my mentors were retiring from Microsoft after 30-year careers, etc. So I remember having a very memorable conversation saying, this is great. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, and I love Microsoft. I love my colleagues, but I find myself wondering, what am I actually, doing for the world? It's my personal purpose, this, that, and the other. She was very patient and to listening to me. And she said, "You know what, when I was kind of questioning myself about 20 years ago in a similar point of my career, what worked for me was I took a sabbatical. I took a year off, and I was completely horrified at the very idea of taking time off. The longest gaps between jobs I'd had was 1 week to this point. Right? So, but the more she said,
We are completely, it's wonderful that you found both purpose and you enjoyed what you were doing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, it's such a high pressure environment, which people on the outside don't realize. Because while you talked of growing the business from, 7 million to 100 million in 3 years, I'm sure you understood what was involved at every stage.
Yeah. Certainly, I think, look, one of the things that you learn which is a truism in life that I find, at least it works for me, is teamwork makes the dream work, right? So don't try to do everything yourself. When I first started off being a people manager, I was terrible at it because, like many other bright young people of my age, you start off as a really outstanding individual contributor. Even as a salesperson, the early success that I saw was, me as a sort of going and taking chances and, relying on my ability to speak and persuade people, etc. But that doesn't sustain, right? If you want to really grow and succeed, and the job of a leader is to create an environment where your entire team is able to do their best work. That's what I learned from my mentors, and that's what I've continued to believe. So if you do that, then you find success at that scale. If you're not able to inspire people and take them along with you and work together towards those common goals, none of these big goals are achievable, right? So that is something that I truly truly believe and continue to believe. And the other thing is, I think somebody had made the comment. I think in your LinkedIn post, when you folks had talked about this session, somebody had said, um, I I'm something about change and how to handle change. And another thing that I deeply believe that I've learned over the years is the best way to handle change is to create it yourself. There's no avoiding it. There's no running away from it. If you try and stand, it'll be like that. It's like standing in the way of one of an avalanche coming at you. It's going to bury you and move on. you know. So it's best that you try to be part of that change and adapt to it in that way. So change is the only constant.
So then you were talking of no, so you were talking of the mentor telling you, or the person who's been at Microsoft telling you that at some point take a sabbatical, which you didn't want to do.
Which I did not want. And that idea kind of cooked in my head for a while. But then I realized that, look, the more I did actually think through some meaningful things, and I realized that there have been causes that I've consistently been interested in, have, for example, donated charitably to, or also volunteered time to consistently over the years, right? And again, my family is has always been very committed to charitable giving and making sure that we give away money to good causes and so on. So there were three causes which have consistently been at the top of my list. One is climate and the environment. I do strongly believe we need to do something so that our planet is habitable for the next, for ourselves and for the generations to come. Women's development issues are also very close to my heart. And bridging the digital skills divide. As I said, I was very strong conviction that this technology genie can't be put back in the bottle, and it's going to continue to transform the world. And it's a huge predictor of success or failure. Your ability to, have access to digital skills or not have access to digital skills. And that, I think, bridging that divide is the key to bridging other kinds of divides, the social divide, the wealth divide, and all the other sort of divides that we have. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I'm sitting in the corporate world, I'll continue to succeed, but there's not going to be enough mental space for me to really explore what to do in these other areas. And I was very, again, most of my employers have treated me well enough that I'm in a situation where I could take financial risks, right? To say, okay, I can step away from the security of a monthly salary and explore some of these things. Of course, the timing of when I did this was not conscious. So Jan 2020 was when I put in my papers at ServiceNow. And literally I realized 2 months from then, the world would be completely different from anything any of us had imagined. So, but it turned out to be, a blessing in disguise, because we got our venture fund or funds off the ground during the pandemic. Our fund is a pandemic baby. Some of the other organizations that I spent time with, including Aspire for Her, which was started by my junior Madhura Dasgupta Sinha from XLRI. That's an organization that focuses on getting women to enter and stay in the workforce, because India has this problem of women's labor force participation being quite low. The other causes that I volunteer with, most of these things I got involved with during the pandemic lockdown period. I was still living in Singapore at the time. But thank heavens for technology. Most of this happened over Zoom and Teams calls and web conferences and video conferences. But we did get past that particular situation. And 3 years from then, I'm excited to see what will happen next. Very much learn to live in the moment.
Yeah. Right. So you must be getting a lot of pitches from young entrepreneurs, startups, and that's your daily, it's almost like a daily routine. So
it is very much my daily routine, and it's my conscious daily routine. I love that. So it's not just, the startup pitches which are interesting. And I'll tell you a couple of examples of, striking conversations that happen. One is, I do mentor some startup founders as well as, others, people, young professionals and people at various stages of their career as well. Because as I said, I've been very lucky to have great mentoring throughout my career. And I think it's important to try and give back. The other thing I've learned is mentoring, actually, you get quite a lot of stuff back, because the more you work with people, the better it broadens your perspective. You learn a lot in the process of mentoring others as well. So two stories I wanted. One is, of a young person that I met. I had been a panelist at a sort of a small event in Bangalore. This is about 3-4 weeks ago, where I'd been speaking with we were a panel of folks from the venture capital world, and we were talking about startups. And one of the conversations we went through was, how this whole funding winter is happening right now for, startups and what's going to happen. And I sort of shared my perspective saying, I thought the sky had fallen when the dot-com bust happened in the early 2000s. And then, I thought the sky had fallen again when 2008, this recession happened. And yet somehow, we survived and got through, we adapted. So like Charles Darwin said, it's the survival is not the strongest or the most intelligent. It's the ones who are most able to adapt to change, right? So that is the thing that applies to these situations as well. This too shall pass. We need to adapt to this new set of circumstances. And maybe some of the unnecessary hype it might be a blessing in disguise in some ways, because it will separate the wheat from the chaff. I'm not saying it's not traumatic. Unfortunately, some companies and even some funders will not be able to weather this. It's challenging times. But this is, again, it's an opportunity as well, right? So, like the old proverb goes, tough times never last, but tough people do, and tough companies do as well. And tough companies are nothing but the people, right? So, the story that I wanted to tell is, this young engineer walked up to me, and he's been working in the software field for about 7 years, and he's just come back to the US. He unfortunately lost his job, so he lost his H-1B visa, so he's come back to India. But he's found another job. But he's a techie with good skills. He's found another job. He said, "Look, the job that I really want to ask you about, and I want to ask you how I get into it, is this thing that I saw online, and that one of the people that I know, or through an acquaintance, has become." And I said, "Okay, what is that role?" He said, "It's entrepreneur in residence at this VC." I said, "Entrepreneur in residence. Okay, tell me more about what you mean by that." And he said, "No, this person that I know is working at this US VC firm, and he's the entrepreneur in residence, and he gets a 200,000 salary, plus he gets stock in the companies that he brings to the table and mentors, etc., etc. And that's the job, that's my dream job, and that's what I want to become." So I was a little challenged not to sort of giggle a little bit at that, but I thought it would be rude. So I decided to take a step back and answer that question a little bit seriously. I said, "Okay, first of all, what is the background of that person who became entrepreneur in residence?" He said, "Yeah, he's my friend's older cousin, and he had started 2 businesses in Silicon Valley, sold them off, and then he became this entrepreneur in residence." I said, that is the key. The entrepreneur in residence means that the starting point is you have to be an entrepreneur who's had a reasonable amount of success, and then they'll hire you to share your expertise with others. So the long way around to that job is, over the years, you would start your own business, you would sell it off, and then people will come to you saying, "How did you build your business and how did you successfully sell it off?" And then you can become an entrepreneur in residence. I think he was a little disappointed that I didn't have a magical shortcut to give him.
No, but that is so true that this, and the internet is full of stories where in 3 weeks I made $400,000 doing this and something else, which is like, I mean, I'm saying, there is a formula. It's hard work consistently over decades. Unfortunately, nobody thinks that is the formula. They think that there is a shortcut.
Yeah, no, there's another, anyway, there's lots of stories like this. You're exactly right, Venu. But I think I was very impressed by this startup founder who was pretty young, was only 29 years old, and had actually, this was the 3rd startup that they were bringing to the table and were telling me about. And it's, the startup is still quite young. They've not yet got a prototype ready. It's a very interesting idea, and I offered to connect them to some people. What I was impressed by was this, right? They started a business while they were still in college with some of their college mates, and it failed, and they had to shut it down, and they went their separate ways. Then this guy started a second startup with some work colleagues, because he joined again an IT company, as one does, and was doing work there. And while moonlighting, he started another business with some office colleagues, and that actually ended up finding some traction. But he said he had a bad experience and had to part ways with his partners. So he had left that startup on somewhat sort of bad terms. But look at the passion of this guy. He's now started his third startup, right? I said, look, I really admire your perseverance and your commitment to being an entrepreneur. He said, yeah, because, I know that one day my dream is to be a really successful entrepreneur and make a difference. I said, that's it. There is no way that someone like you is not going to succeed with your commitment, with your passion, and everything that you've learned from what you've done before. I'm sure you will continue to do well. And that I thought was very admirable. And that's the attitude all of us have to have.
And that's a wonderful note to end it on, because I think, Divya, you've really touched upon, though we spent a lot of time on the early part of your career. I think that's the fundamental building block. And now you're in a stage where you're giving back, you're helping a whole lot of people succeed, as well as ensuring that women enter and stay in the workforce for much longer. Thank you for spending this time with us. Is there anything that you'd like to close with?
Well, I'd just like to say something. I'll share something that was shared with me when I was, starting out my career. There is no single path to success, right? You as an individual will not have the same path to success as your sibling or your best friend or your neighbor. You as an individual have your own strengths, your own weaknesses, your own interests, your own enthusiasm, your own opportunities. The key thing is, when you find an opportunity and you find a new opportunity to do something, I would say, if you are 100% confident that you can do it, there's something wrong with that opportunity. You should always jump into opportunities where you say, maybe 30% of this I can do, 70% of this I'll have to go and discover. I'll learn on the job. That's the opportunity you should go for. Because if you're just going to do the thing that you're 100% sure you've done before and you're doing again, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not doing anything new. That's not opportunity. So go after the opportunity that scares you a little bit. That's the advice I'd like.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful words, and they ring so true because they come from a lived experience, which I think is one of the things that, people, there's no other way. You simply have to go through the university of experiences, I call it, because there is no other.
Or you can learn from the university of other people's experiences, which is also good.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. So thank you, Divya, for taking out the time and sharing so much of your learnings, the setbacks, the phases that you passed through, and how you worked on them. Because I'm sure that anyone who listens to this will see exactly, like you said, they won't take the same lessons, they won't follow the same paths, but they'll at least have the material to say, this is how I built my own. Thank you for being on the...
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone. Have a great week.
That was Divya Sampath. And as you listened, it's been a life lived with several twists and turns, zigzags, as she calls it. So next time, come back for another session of My First Job, the podcast.